today's topic is tendon. What is it? We're going to talk about what tendons truly are and defining kind of what they break down to. The most commonly injured tendon in the body will be next week. The different levels of tendon injuries we'll talk about after that. And then the fourth and final video of this series will be how to properly treat tendon issues. Okay, and the treatments are going to differ depending on the level of injury that you have, which we'll touch on a little bit tonight. We won't get into the nitty-gritty details, but we're going to break down what a tendon truly is. Last month, if you haven't seen it, we talked about a ligament, what it is, the most common injured one. We went through the whole series on that. So if you want to go back and watch that, tendons are different than ligaments because a tendon you have voluntary control over, right? You can squeeze your bicep whenever you want to, especially if you're holding a weight. You can do a bicep curl, and that's actually going to activate the tendon, which literally sits there as a connective tissue, just like ligaments, but it connects muscle to bone, right? Ligaments are different because they connect bone to bone. So they're really kind of helpful in keeping the integrity of the joint and keeping it nice and locked in position and stabilizing it. Tendons instead connect that muscle to the bone, being that they help kind of shorten muscles. So when you squeeze them, they kind of pull them together and compress, right? When you stretch them, they kind of lengthen and they pull away from each other. All right. So, like I said, you can't squeeze a ligament like your ACL, but you can squeeze a tendon like your quad tendon by flexing or squeezing your quad. Like, say you're doing a leg extension machine where you're driving your legs out in front of you and you're straightening your leg, thinking about pulling your kneecap upwards. That's your quad tendon actually shortening and you're squeezing it. Right. Tendons really exist to help transmit the force so that your muscles can contract and move your bones and joints. Okay, that's their main job. It's to kind of distribute that force over a larger surface area so your muscles don't get injured and you don't keep straining your muscles, right? Muscles connect to the bones via the tendon. That is the bridge between a muscle and a bone. And that tendon pulls on the bone and it rotates your joint. That's how you truly move when you're using those muscles. Okay. Number two, we're going to talk about is an injury to a tendon. What is it called? It's called a tendinopathy. And pay attention because they recently changed this in the literature from a tendinitis to tendinopathy. And the reason for that is because they've really found that wasn't a lot of inflammation involved in tendinitis. So that's why they termed tendinopathy instead. Right? The majority of issues here come from overuse or repetitive stress. And they really kind of involve low magnitude forces being applied at higher volumes, meaning like if you're running or you're walking for long distances, that's something that can cause sometimes some tendon damage to like your patellar tendon, right? Maybe your quad tendon, maybe your hip flexor tendon. It just really depends on how much you're walking, how much hills are involved, whether there's downhill walking. There's a lot of different factors, but pretty much if I can break it down into simple terms, you usually do too much of an activity that exceeds your tissue capacity and you can't handle it anymore. So it could be a brand new activity or it can be an old activity that you're used to doing, but you're just doing way more of it than you normally would, right? Take like golf, for instance. I actually had this a little bit past this past summer. I've been golfing a lot more and I've always golfed, but I used to do it like maybe once or twice a month. This year I took golf lessons. I was doing it twice a week, right? So really overloaded that capacity and I threw a lot more force at my elbow and I started to feel a lot more on the inner part of my elbow. So luckily I know how to treat it and to reverse it. So I was able to do that, but I also scaled back how much I was golfing a little bit too. So that way I knew it was a tendinopathy, right? Or golfer's elbow. They call it medial epicondylosis or medial epicondylgia. The names don't matter. Just know it's golfer's elbow. And I was doing too much of that activity, even though my body was used to it. Okay. So the typical progression of people getting hurt, right, is that it goes from a healthy tendon to tendinopathy, which used to be called tendinitis, to a tendinosis, which means a degenerative tendon that can become enlarged over time. And then it becomes a tendon rupture where it actually kind of just splits and it can pull off of the bone and evolves a little bit as well. All right. So how can we really tell if it's a tendon issue, right? How do we really know? So 30% of all musculoskeletal injuries in your body are due to a tendon issue. So it's a very, very common theme that plays along, especially in athletes or weightlifters. And the main thing you want to look for is that the pain will be closer to the joint, not in the actual muscle, right? So if you had a tendonitis of your bicep tendon, you're not going to have pain down here in the middle portion of the bicep. You're going to either have it down here where there's a tendon near your elbow, or you're going to have it most commonly up here where it inserts into the shoulder, okay, right in the joint there. So by pinpointing where the pain is, it's always going to be closer to the joint with a tendon issue. Okay. And it hurts when you squeeze that attached muscle, which pulls on the tendon and recreates that pain. All right. It's also going to hurt when you stretch it. So let's take the bicep tendon, for example. If I squeeze it by doing a bicep curl, it's going to be painful if it's kind of flared up a little bit. If I stretch it by extending my elbow and pointing my hand and palm back, it's also going to pull on it and it might irritate it a little bit. So either stretching it or squeezing it and contracting it can cause pain. And another key sign of a tendon issue, guys, is if you feel dull and achy pain at rest, but sharper pain when you stress it and do that bicep curl, right? Injured tendons can take days to kind of calm down from a flare up, and flare ups are very, very common. So sometimes if you're doing things too aggressively, which could just simply be a bicep curl, you can instead switch to doing an isometric where you're just holding it in place for 30 to 45 seconds for 3 to 4 or 5 reps, which we'll talk about more in future videos on how to treat it properly. Okay. Tendons also, guys, will usually feel a lot worse when it's cold. So typically, like when you just go into the gym, you're doing your first set of pull-ups or something, say you did no warm-up at all, you just jump right in, you're going to feel a little less, you're going to feel more pain, a little more stiff. You're going to feel kind of less like warm in a way. So usually when you warm up and you're on your second and third set, where there's some blood flow that gets into that tendon, it's going to feel a little bit better and it's going to open up a little bit more, and you're not going to have as much pain. Okay. It's kind of like runners. If you have Achilles tendonitis or tendinopathy, usually you have pain in the beginning of your run as you just start getting going, and then it goes away throughout the middle of your run, and then it doesn't come back till later on the day or the day afterwards. Okay. So that's really important to understand. Right. And you don't want to keep irritating the tendon, because if you do, that tendinopathy can become a tendinosis, which becomes harder or almost impossible to reverse. So really be careful with that. If you are getting a lot of pain with certain activities, see a medical health professional to help you scale back or change the way you're doing things. Okay. The last thing is you can have a rupture and avulsion, which we talked about, where the tendon actually pulls off of the bone. It's like in an Achilles, like if you guys follow football, like Aaron Rodgers, who is the Jets quarterback now, almost said Green Bay Packers, like his old team, but he had an injury where he had the kind of tendon avulsed off of the actual heel bone, and you heard a loud pop, right? That can happen as well. That's the most intense type of tendon injury you can suffer from. All right. So, guys, just to recap, right, you should understand now what a tendon is, right? What an injury to a tendon is called, which is a tendinopathy, not tendonitis anymore. Remember that. And you should be able to tell if it's a tendon issue based off of what we just talked about, how it's closer to the joint, hurts when you squeeze or you stretch it. And it's usually kind of feels worse when it's cold, but when you get some blood flow to it, it helps feel better and loosen up a little bit. Okay. And guys, healing times we'll talk about in future videos. We won't go into that for now, but just know that if you have a tendon issue, you sometimes want to scale back the activity, keep an activity log to figure out what you're actually doing that could be causing more harm than good. And you might even want to change up the way you're exercising by slowing down your tempos, reducing your load, or doing isometrics instead of normal kind of regular exercise. Okay, thanks so much for watching, guys. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. And remember, at Choffner Rehab and Recovery, we reassess and pick up where traditional PT left off with you. And we help with your rehab and recovery to get you as weightlifters back to 100%. All you need is a phone signal through our online physical therapy process. All right, thanks for tuning in. And stay tuned for next week, where we'll cover the most commonly injured tendon in the body and how and why the injury takes place. All right, thanks, guys, and have a great one.